Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Oh, yes.
Good. Before I begin to talk, I have to first thank Sue and Larry for having this meeting. It's been wonderful, and I know the stress you've been through, because 10 years ago, I also conducted a meeting in this very hotel. So it's been very good. I also want to thank the Magic Lantern Society for inviting me to give this talk. And then finally, I need to mention a little bit of confusion in the program where it listed Jim Fendeland and family, and I think that confused a few of you. I am having my son Steve and my grandson Ethan as assistants, but there are others. And I must tell you, this will tie into the talk, I'm talking about kaleidoscopes with merger with a Magic Lantern projector, but in talking about kaleidoscopes, you have to talk about the inventor, and that was Sir David Brewster. And a few years ago, when I first began researching this project, I came into a hardware store in Cleveland and found a descendant of Sir David's. And I wasn't sure I believed it, but it sounded legitimate. And I knew I was giving this talk eventually, so I invited him to come to this meeting. And about 6 months ago, I returned to this hardware store and talked to the party. And he sort of thought about it, but he declined. But I thought it'd be nice to have descendants come to your ancestors' talk. And so I next asked my descendants if they would be interested in coming. And surprisingly, they all said yes. And I got nervous to the point that I thought we'd have to have a sign out in the other room there. It would be the Magic Lantern Society and the Vendeland family reunion. So I've got a support group here if I need them. I don't think I will. I will need the remote though. Thank you. My assistant, okay. And as you can see the title, it's a beautiful, we call these patterns mandalas, and that's what you see when you look into a kaleidoscope, if you have a good kaleidoscope. This is Sir David. He was, I think, one of the greatest minds of the 19th century. He was born in Edinburgh. He was a physicist with an interest in optics and in crystals. He was a mathematician, a historian, an author, a biographer, and an inventor. And in 1816, he invented the kaleidoscope. But in one area, he was not so good, and that was business acumen. He made the mistake of informing his colleagues, optical workers in Edinburgh and in London, what a wonderful invention he had discovered. And he did have it patented, but it was not a binding patent at that time. And he bragged about how easy it would be to make these things. They would be the entertainment, just think cell phone 200 years ago. They would sell like hotcakes. They'd make a lot of money. Well, these people listened to him and they said, hey, we can do this too. This is great. And they produced thousands of these cutoffs. It's been estimated over 200,000 were produced within the first 3 months that these were released in Europe. And Sir David ruled the day that he opened his big mouth before he had his patent well defined. But he was a great man in many areas. Now, he was also a star, and in those days to be a star, you had to appear on a cardboard cover. I know smoking isn't approved now, but this was there he is, and it's hard to get on these covers. And he's also in a video game called Assassin's Creed. Even if it was assassinated, he was still in the game. So this made him a superstar, just by this means. And he was an author. He wrote Martyrs. He wrote actually 3 separate editions on the kaleidoscope. The first one appearing in 1817. And he also wrote a biography of Isaac Newton. And I have these books, and he writes well. Now this is a poster from 1818. The kaleidoscope at that time was for the masses. It was a form of entertainment, outdoor entertainment. You used the sun for your illumination. And in this poster you can see that everyone is enjoying these. And if you couldn't afford the kaleidoscope, you could rent it for a few pennies. So they had vendors in every street corner making them available. But there were some problems that could occur. Still can if you're not careful. If you focus through the barrel with one eye, but if you close the other eye, you don't see this young man come tearing down. He's not looking where he's going either. So it could be a problem. And even more so if you were married and paying attention more to the kaleidoscope rather than to your wife. You can see that she's busy with someone else behind his back. So these could be problems. Now what I'm going to present to you in the next half hour is Kaleidoscope's Basic 101. And the definition of kaleidoscope means to see beautiful shapes or geometric figures. And I mentioned we call these shapes mandalas. And they are very pretty. This is a model that, believe it or not, I put together. It took me 3 days, probably should have taken 3 hours. But I was proud I could cut myself and I established it. And this is just to point out the structures with this pointer, which isn't pointing, wrong direction, pointing in the area. And this is the barrel. It's a hollow tube, usually with brass, or it could be wood or wood veneer. At one end you have the eyepiece, which is brass, and it may have a small reading lens in it. The opposite end, you have what's called the object's chamber. And that's exactly what it is. It's a chamber, a little space containing objects. And these objects may be little shards of colorful glass or jewels. They may be little ampules filled with colored different dyes and oils. They can be organic, they can be little plant leaves or insect wings or anything you want to stuff in there. And on the other side is the mandala that I got, and all right, it's not bad for a beginner. So this is just to give you an idea of the structures. And symmetry was very important in designing these patterns. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Get back to here. The guts of the kaleidoscope is the mirror system, and it was either a 2-mirror or a 3-mirror system. And they would form triangles. And in the 3-mirror system, you wanted to form equilateral triangles. And so your light would come in and it would shine on the little glass shards, and they would produce images on the mirrors. And in a 3-mirror system, which we'll look at first, now to the left, it's a repetitive wallpaper pattern. And I think there are a few of you in the room here who might know what the right represents. Mally's is a candy store in Cleveland. And they make very good milk chocolate. We're into milk chocolate, candy. And this is their breakup milk chocolate. And I think of that when I think of the 3-mirror patterns. And this tastes much better also, by the way. Okay, now the 2-mirror is more interesting. 2 mirrors, you glue 2 mirrors together at the apex, you keep the base empty, or you put a piece of tape across it. And Sir David found that by varying the angle of this 2-mirror system, you can determine, or he determined, how many stars you'll get in the mandala or the geometric figures, what shape it'll be. And as an example, if you have 60-degree angle here, he determined you would get a 6-pointed star or a hexagonal geometric figure. And it would be symmetric. And if you had a 45-degree angle, he had a formula, figured out it would get octagonal, an 8-sided figure, or 8-pointed star. And again, it would be symmetric. Now, somewhere in between, you would not have symmetry. Symmetry was beauty. Okay, on the left, 2-mirror system, this is a hexagonal 6-pointed star. This is a hexagonal. This would be an octagonal pattern. Now, ignore this is artifact in the center. I just want to show you the symmetry, how pretty these are, equally spaced in the periphery. If you look at this one, at first glance it looks symmetric, but I would call your attention to these rosettes over here. The two are touching one another, whereas the rest of the pattern, they are not. So this is not a symmetric pattern, and this is not as pretty. Now looking at the mirrors, they have different mirrors. From 1816 to 1980, they used back surface reflecting mirrors in the systems. And looking here, it looks like it's smudgy, it's dirty. No. This is what happens to you after you're 200 years old. There's chemical decomposition, degeneration, and so this is what it results in. Now, in 1980, they introduced anterior or front surface reflecting mirrors, and you can see this is a much clearer image. What it'll be in 200 years, I have no idea, but it may revert the same way. Now, I've divided arbitrarily the ages of thinking about these kaleidoscopes into four, and the first one is the age of Brewster, and that's from 1816 when he produced these to about 1870. This is from my collection, and this, just to show you, this is elegant. This is brass, and this is a black lacquer. The eyepiece on one side, the other side would have the object chamber, which was removed. This is the holder for the object chamber, and this would be the object chamber. Actually, these early ones, this was actually painted on one surface of the chamber rather than stuff inside the chamber. But look at this mantle, it is beautiful. And what you would do if this were moving around, you would just rotate the barrel of this, and you can actually, by rotating this, get slight variations, even with a fixed image. And I imagine this would work also with magic lantern slides. That just a little rotation, you get light coming a different direction, and it would be slight variations. But basically, to many, it was boring, so they wanted to use the object chamber where you can get an infinite number of patterns. This is another very early Brewster kaleidoscope. This one is a stand model, and it's brass. And the same thing, eyepiece here, object chamber here, which you could rotate separate from having to rotate the barrel. And again, you have this beautiful pattern. It looks dark here because it's aging changes in the mirrors. Now the next age or era, I arbitrarily set this as the age of Bush, from 1870 to roughly 1890. Now Charles Bush, and it was B-U-S-C-H in Prussia, immigrated to the United States in the 1840s. He was from a family of knot makers. And apparently to make good knots, you had to use a microscope. He became very proficient with the microscope. In fact, he mentored many people who would come and visit him and learn how to use the microscope. But when he came to the United States, he decided to go into the kaleidoscope business. But he was smarter than Sir David in business acumen. He made sure his patent was solid. And he catered to indoor, here's a picture of Charles, dropped the C when he came to the U.S., this Bush. He patented his instrument. It was a stand or parlor instrument, which meant this was an indoor kaleidoscope. You entertain people at a table, either you played the piano for them or you entertained them in the 1870s and 80s. They would come, sit around a table, and they'd each look through here. And you used artificial lighting, a lamp that would give you illumination. And he patented, first of all, this is the exterior is not so impressive. It's like cardboard. So this is like a little cap over here. The wheel is distinctive for his type of kaleidoscopes. It's like a ship's steering wheel with these little knobs. And this rotated independently, so you could shake up the stuff inside. And this is what the images look like. You can see you have a star figure here. But what I call your attention to are these ampules filled with this beautifully colored dye and oil. He's like the Stradivarius of the kaleidoscope. To this day, no one has been able to reproduce these dyes exactly. Now this is optic chamber that's cut away, so you can really get an appreciation of the ampules that he made. And I say he, well, he and his daughter and one apprentice, they're the only ones who made these, and they made about 8,000 of them in his lifetime. And in 80 of these kaleidoscopes, he put in something up here, which is a little difficult to see. I'll show you a better picture in a moment, but it was a little embossed glass swan. I have no idea why I put them in. I like to think of it as a Cracker Jack. I'm sure the older ones here know what the Cracker Jack box was, and you had a prize inside. But I never, in my readings, I never found out why he intended these in, but they're kind of neat, and I have actually two. One is brown-eyed, one is blue-eyed, whatever that means. But it was kind of exciting. So his were the upper end of these scopes, and they still are worth a lot of money and continue. Now this age of toy kaleidoscopes we're all familiar with. And we start around 1860, and it goes beyond 1980, it goes into the present time. And there is a Cleveland connection to them. But first, you look through here, we've all seen these, you pick them up, look through, maybe a couple minutes later you're bored, and that's about it for a while. But this actually began back in 1860s, and this is a drawing that was in one of the magazines at that time. You can see the father is so engrossed in this thing, and the kids are just dying to get a chance to look, and the daughter's pulling at his shoulder. Dad, let me have an opportunity. And well, just, my turn. But there's a Cleveland connection, and I have to tell you this brief story. There was a boy named Stephen, no relation to mine, but in 1946 he lived in St. Louis, and his father's name was Mr. Zimmelman, and they came to Cleveland for a wedding, and they had some free time, and they walked around the streets and in department stores, and they found a kaleidoscope, and of course Stephen asked his dad, would you buy it for me? Well, Mr. Zimmelman said, well, let's think about it, we'll get back to St. Louis, maybe. He was hoping the kid would forget about it. Well, Stephen didn't. They got back to St. Louis, they went looking, they couldn't find any kaleidoscopes in St. Louis. It was 1946. So Mr. Zimmelman thought, well, these are easy to make. He thought, like Sir David, I could do this myself. And he did. He made a few. He gave some to relatives and friends. And they reported back, these were terrific. You should go into business. And that's precisely what Mr. Zimmelman did. He found a factory in St. Louis. He converted it to making kaleidoscopes. And you know what the name was of the kaleidoscope company? Stephen Toy Kaleidoscope Company, which became the world's largest producer of toy kaleidoscopes. At its height, it produced more than 400,000 kaleidoscopes a year, which is kind of impressive. And they still make them. And the one on the right says Stephen, and the one rather than the left, and then the one on the right, it's a little foggy. Of course, they had to use plastic material. Glass would be too dangerous for having little kids, smashing them around, which of course they would, or some dog chewing them up. Now, the final age, the final category that I classify these is the age of kaleidoscopic art. My assistant ready? And it goes from 1980 to the present time. And kaleidoscopic art, again, a brief story. Cozy Baker was a wealthy widow in the U.S., and she had a tragedy, beside her husband, she had a tragedy where her only son was killed in an auto accident. And Cozy was grieving, and she traveled to try and relieve herself of the grief, and she visited friends, and she came in one's home and saw a kaleidoscope on the table. She picked it up, she looked through it, and she had this epiphany. She became relaxed, the grieving process seemed to ease, she was calm, and because of that, she decided to devote her fortune and the remaining years of her life to encouraging artists to make kaleidoscopes, to create kaleidoscopes. And she also founded the Brewster Kaleidoscope Society of America, which has about 1,400 members, and they have annual meetings. So it's an interesting story, and we're going to show you, and I'm going to keep quiet in a moment, But I'm going to show you a small series of these kaleidoscopes. Each one is different. Frequently, the external appearance is more prettier than the internal appearance. Okay, and if it works, do I have to do anything else? Okay.
One moment, please.
See, this is why I have assistants. Somebody actually knows what I'm doing.
One moment.
Yeah, well, I can also talk about chromotopes. If you have some chromotopes, some of these displays are just wonderful. Chromatope is a double slide with painted on each side, and there's a ratchet system where you can rotate them, and you get fireworks effects. And one of the journal articles from the Gazette, you have a beautiful Chinese fireworks chromatope. And then in this issue, you should look at page 7 and 9. There's a link to a scientist in Australia, Kieran Brown, who has a wonderful article about how these kaleidoscopes work. You ready?
Yep.
You tap a little bit of the button? How do I get the, okay, can we?
Huh?
These are just amazing designs. This is actually, the one on the right is a three-dimensional view, which you can't display on a two-dimensional screen. This is a wand type of kaleidoscope. On the left, there's oil in this rod, and you can get interchangeable rods, and you tilt the rod. In cold weather, like in Cleveland outdoors, this is a little more of a problem because the oil gets sour. So it takes a while, but this creates these beautiful mandalas. This is from Japan. Now, did you know, probably you don't know, except a couple of guys whom I told, they have 5 museums dedicated in Japan to kaleidoscopes. In this country, we got zip. I don't know why. It's just beautiful workmanship. This is one with plant material and oil in the object chamber, and it forms this attractive mandala. This is a binocular kaleidoscope, and you can't fuse the images together on this one. No. Next one. This is a wheel type. These are common that you might see in collections. And look at this image, it's just beautiful work. This one has a 3-dimensional view, which is really gorgeous, and it has a wheel also on the left. And finally, this has a penguin. It's on there, and then this actually has a rectangular image is on the inside. Okay, going on, almost done. I'm being mesmerized by a kaleidoscope. People ask me, some people say, why are you collecting these things? How'd you get interested in them? And, do you know what's on his desk? I think I lost my pointer. But if you look at that kaleidoscope standing up, yeah, I got it.
Backwards.
Yeah, that's me. Okay, there we go. That's up and down. That's a kaleidoscope. And I'll just briefly read. This was given to Albert Einstein on his birthday. And he writes, Dear Mrs. Daman, I've got to write you again to let you know just how much I am enjoying the kaleidoscope. It always sits on my table, and I look into it again and again as I sit and work. You really hit the bullseye with it. Greetings and best wishes, yours, Albert Einstein. Well, if it's good enough for Albert, it was good enough for me. And then I will show you this young boy. This is the 19th century. You can see the smile on his face. He's enjoying this. He's holding that little kaleidoscope up to his eye. And I have just a very short, very short 5-line poem or so. Variation on a nursery rhyme. Little Jack Horner sat in a corner, his kaleidoscope to his eye. He exclaimed with glee at what he did see, and looked some more with a sigh. Okay, now, Not quite done yet. I'll take the applause anyway. But, okay, so that concludes the basics on kaleidoscopes. But you know, you want to know what am I doing here with about the magic lantern? Well, I will tell you. These are just mandala. This is gorgeous, and they're hard to photograph. There was one member of the Brewster Club who was also a photographer. He did beautiful work, and he was able to get these magnificent type of images. Okay, this is Sir David Brewster's first edition of his book on kaleidoscopes, 1817, and Van Court Company reproduced these, so this book is available. It's the math, the geometry he worked out for figuring out all these things. But I wanted to quote from, this is in 1818 that he wrote this: "The pictures which it creates are visible only to one person at a time." That's looking through the kaleidoscope. "But it is by no means difficult to fit it up in such a manner as to exhibit them upon a wall to any number of spectators." So he's saying in 1818 that this can be done for a group of you, like here, to see simultaneously these images. And then this is just from my collection, that you can have interchangeable object chambers. And this is actually a combination telescope, kaleidoscope. So you can take the ring out that supports the object chamber and put in the one that's for the telescope with a little lens. And then the next, almost final, second to last, was a little complicated, but again, it points out when the instrument is thus fitted, when an enlarged image of the pattern will be thrown upon the wall, and by turning the object plate around, use a handle and you crank it, or a linear one, you can go back and forth with it, you can get a pattern on the wall that undergoes every possible transformation and exhibit to the spectators in a magnified form all those variations which have been observed by applying the eye to the kaleidoscope. In other words, what the individual saw, everyone can now see at the same time. And just to point out, the top picture is this chromatrope kaleidoscope, which is containing an object chamber, and there's little fragments of glass. Below that, you can recognize the chromatrope, which is the two painted discs with a small chamber inside where you have gear system, and that you've seen, and it gives you a fireworks appearance. Now, on the bottom right is the Darker Company, D-A-R-K-E-R Company, kaleidoscopic lens for the magic lantern. And then to the left is my little butcher boy kaleidoscope that I've tried about 3 years to fit these two together. That's an adventure and a whole story in itself. Didn't work, but I was able to set up an optical bench. And an optical bench was used in physics where you can line up a source of light, being the magic lantern, and the object lens, and you put in between the chromatrope slide. This is just a drawing of these, but it shows you the three alignment. And I was able to produce these images on a screen. And then we found it just didn't work in real time, but it worked if I took a movie of it. So we now have the 1 minute movie, which will take 2 minutes to set up. Maybe. No, I have my assist. He's very good, by the way. I have the, there you go. So this is, again, we have like an optic bench, and as you rotate, you'll see different images. And with my magic lantern, I just didn't have the illumination, the brightness to get closer. But as you see, it gives you a different, as you turn the handle, it moves these glass particles, and maybe someday I'll find out the magic lantern that actually works with this. The other problem I had with the magic lantern is that this slide was too thick to fit in the tray. And I even tried to have a restorer make me a thinner one, and unfortunately it didn't work as well either. Okay, I think we can cut that off, and the slide I have, which you probably left off, I'll just, if there are any questions, that was the last final slide. Any questions about magic lanterns and kaleidoscopes?
Wow. It says you have two mirror sets on this. It's a little different than the other kaleidoscope where you had.
Actually, it was hard to, yeah, there are actually 3